It is my pleasure just to moderate this excellent panel of excellent persons dealing with the OSCE. It is a challenge for Polish foreign policy. Next year, chairmanship in office will be resumed by Minister Rau. We have here Secretary General of the OSCE, Helga Schmid, Foreign Minister of Poland, Minister Zbigniew Rau, and Robert Rydberg, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden. Currently, this year, Sweden holds chairmanship in office of the organization. Let me start with asking Helga Schmid first question relating to her perception of security architecture in Europe and the role of the OECD in that architecture. Let me also add that Helga was for many years Secretary General of European External Action Service. She took part in meetings of foreign affairs for 4 or 5 years. So she has deep understanding of European issues. I would like to see how do you see it from that perspective?
Thank you very much. And first, I'm very happy to be in Warsaw, and of course, very much look forward to working very closely with the incoming Polish chair. On your question, and indeed also looking at it from my previous capacity, I think the security, and particularly the security concept the OSCE has, which is really broad security, it's everything. It's political, military, environmental security, human dimension, is absolutely crucial. And is as relevant today as it was when the Helsinki Final Act was adopted. And maybe sometimes you hear, yeah, well, the OSCE fine, but this is a bit back in the Cold War, and it has great achievements. And indeed, I mean, here in Poland, Solidarność, Charter 77, probably even German unification wouldn't have been possible without the CSCE process. But it's not lost nothing when it comes to its relevance. I mean, the Helsinki Final Act, for me, is still one of the most impressive documents. The OSCE is one of the few fora these days that actually bring everyone together, particularly when it comes to military contacts. Think about the eroding arms control architecture. But then again, we also are adapting, and if I compare it with the EU, the OSCE is almost in a better place because you have everyone around the table, and I think we have very well been adapting to the challenging regional, sub-regional dynamics, be it in Eastern Europe. I mean, in Ukraine, I mean, I worked a lot on Ukraine in the EU, but it was the OSCE in 2014 that put up the special monitoring mission that is still there, that is not only monitoring the ceasefire, that is also doing crucial work to help make people's life easier by facilitating, for example, repair work. The OSCE is also leading the political process. No one else could have done it. Or look at the work we're doing on reconciliation, on reforms in Southeastern Europe, or now Afghanistan. The Afghanistan contact is putting a particular challenge on Central Asia, where we do a lot of work because we are there on the ground to build resilience with our altogether 16 field missions. So there is a new element also, and this is, I think, some of the new challenges out there, like human trafficking, where the OSCE is doing great work together with the UN. I have to say, I didn't know that until recently. It's 25 million victims a year, hardly any prosecution, 1 out of 2,000. And here we work together with UN and are leading also in that respect. There is a discussion starting about where do we want to be. Also in 2025. It has started under the Swedish chairpersonship, and I'm very grateful for that, because any organization also needs to look a bit into the future. There's always room for improving effectiveness and also efficiency. I'm doing my best internally as Chief Administrative Officer, but I think it's a very relevant discussion to see in terms of how can we re-energize some of the maybe more sterile debates we are having and also maybe how not to. And again, thank you to Sweden for doing a great job on the budget. Even if we had a late adoption of the budget and we spent too much time on budget-related issues, which would be better spent on some of the more substantial issues. And maybe last point is, because the mayor also mentioned it, is climate change. This is for me really the generational challenge we're all facing. And also, like other organizations, we do great work on promoting regional cooperation, transboundary water management, for example. We've done very good work under the Swedish chair, and of course, very much look forward also to the incoming Polish chair. So to sum it up, the OSCE is the indispensable organization.
I think it is even more important for countries of Central Europe. It's our neighborhood to the east. Caucasus, but also Central Asia. I remember Ministerial Council meeting in 2019 when Poland was entrusted with chairmanship. I must admit that it was the most difficult negotiation we had, just to be given that role overnight with Armenian ministers, with Azerbaijani ministers. You have to have unanimity to accept a country to hold this position, chairmanship, and also it must be accepted by Russia. And Minister Ławrow congratulated us to be elected, to be entrusted. It was together with Sweden, the same ministerial took decision on two countries. And the time is coming. Next year, Poland will take over responsibility, but this year already is in Troika. Minister Rau already announced priorities of Polish chairmanship at the meeting in Vienna. Minister Rau, what are these priorities? On what issues Poland wants to concentrate?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I suppose that we should combine the presentation of the priorities with the outline of the challenges we are facing, and this means that we in Poland are very well aware of the fact that what we have ahead is a tremendous difficult task, and I suppose this is the best time to express here my high esteem for our Swedish colleagues. You steered the organization through difficult times by dialogue, by perseverance, and by staunch commitment to the basic OECD principles and indeed values. So I would like to assure all of you that we are intending to follow your approach, because it will, in the longer term, it has to pay off. Now, let me tell you about the main challenges, and I would say some of them are in fact structural challenges that the previous Swedish chairmanship, not present Swedish chairmanship, and the future Polish chairmanship would certainly face, and hopefully the challenges will disappear after our chairmanship. But something that I don't believe, quite frankly. Let me indicate the most striking problems. Well, you certainly know, and Helga was kind enough to mention that, I suppose, that the over 8 months delay in adopting the OSCE budget for the present year. And the other thing was very depressing event, I would say, that the organization was not in a position, was not able to launch human dimension implementation meeting 2 years in the row. So the question is, why it's so difficult to arrange things that are an integral part of the functioning of the institution? My answer is, it's the lack of consensus in many situations. The OSCE is in a position to function, is in a position to go forward only if the chairperson in office and their co-workers are in a position to ensure consensus and, in a way, almost enforce the respect for consensus. There is no consensus, so the institution is not going to go forward. And of course, there are countries that are less inclined to participate in building the consensus very enthusiastically at the very beginning of the process. So I don't want to mention them, but nevertheless, I'm experienced enough as a member of the Troika to realize that out of these 57 countries, there are some that are especially difficult to join the consensus. And very often it happens that the organization is stuck in mutual accusation of non-compliance with international law, norms and standards, and so on and so on. So what is missing is very often the mutual trust. So nevertheless, we have to understand that there is no better platform for discussing the security architecture in Europe because of its inclusiveness, because of its experience, almost 50 years old, and because of the instruments that we had at the disposal there and nowhere else. That's, I suppose, and if we take into consideration all that, I must say, it indicates that to chair the OECD is a profound obligation, above all, to use all these instruments, to use all this experience, to use those who can potentially, all the participating states that have a potential for building a consensus. So now if we, because the moderator, Minister Czaputowicz, asked me about our priorities, so very briefly, that's first of all, I would call it advancing responsibility by supporting OSCE structure. So I mean the conflict resolution formats, processes, and of course field missions in searching for the ways to mitigate and finally solve above all frozen conflicts, because there are so many of them, especially in the eastern part of the continent. The second priority is promoting recovery by responding to the post-COVID situation in the OSCE region through strengthening social resilience, through strengthening human rights execution, and of course by effective multiculturalism. And the final thing is ensuring inclusiveness by fully utilizing the OSCE potential on the ground and placing, once more I would like to underline it, to place human rights once more very high on the OSCE agenda. And what we in Poland are very proud of, and it stems from our tradition of our activities in the international institutions. We would like to focus on the assistance to civilians in conflict zones, especially assistance to women, children, and of course the people with disabilities.
Thank you, Minister, for your remarks, and I fully agree that building trust, the problem with the unanimity, budgetary acceptance for budget, these are challenges, and also human rights. Let me ask Robert Rydberg I remember my talks with Ann Linde before the decision was taken by Sweden to embark upon or not to do it, and she hesitated. It was discussion in your government. But from today's perspective, tell me, Robert, was it worth to take over this responsibility? And what would be your advice to Poland, please?
Please say something encouraging.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Warsaw. It's great to be here also with a three-dimensional live group of people, even if I in this light see you less than what I have seen people in Zoom and Skype meetings for the past 2 years. Let me start by saying something nice about Poland. First of all, I think it is extremely important. It's extremely important also from a Swedish point of view that Poland will succeed us as chairperson of the OSCE. I believe it's important that countries like Poland, and for that matter Sweden, have a principled, sustained view on European security, take on this type of task. A task which is not easy, a task which is sometimes frustrating, but which is very much worthwhile. It has been worthwhile for us, and I'm sure it will be worthwhile for you. If I look back at the 3 quarters of our chairpersonship year, I would say that we are proud, first of all, that we have stuck to our priorities, we have stuck to our principled positions on the fundamentals of European security. Defending the European security order, defending, upholding the OSCE comprehensive view on security. That has been very much the theme, for example, in the extremely extensive travels of our minister, particularly extensive travels to conflict areas of the OSCE region. Ukraine is a case in point. Minister Linde has already been twice to Ukraine. She's planning her 3rd meeting. This is a conflict which is not frozen, but a hot conflict in the heart of Europe, where we see violations of international law occurring on a daily basis. We need to do our utmost to keep Ukraine high on the international agenda and high on the OSCE agenda. We need to work with issues like humanitarian access, with issues like permitting people to cross between at the crossing points in Ukraine. We need to maintain and defend the freedom of movement for the SMM observers, for example. We have now appointed, which is important, a new representative, special representative to the Trilateral Contact Group, which will play, I hope, also an important role in the future negotiating efforts on the Ukraine. Let me also mention a Swedish priority where we have been working hard during our chairpersonship and where I am confident that our Polish and North Macedonian successors will also give more emphasis is the question of women, peace and security, which we believe is an essential part also of the European security order. We have established a special advisory group on these issues. We have seen a more active involvement of women, for example, in the ongoing negotiations in the Geneva international dialogue on the Southern Caucasus. So these are important points where I hope that we have also put a mark that will be felt in the future work of the OSCE.
Well, thank you very much for that, drawing our attention to the most important pending issue in the region. Helga mentioned military security, confidence-building measures. There is a second basket, which is economy, and I think very important one, the third one, you mentioned tradition, solidarity, Charter 77, even unification of Germany. We owe that to Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, I think. Poland, it is the second time we will have that role, chairmanship in office. In 1998, Bronisław Geremek was minister and he played that role. So after 20 few years, we will take over again that responsibility. But when I was a minister, I used to open a conference on human dimension implementation meeting. Last year, it was justified by COVID. The conference was not organized. And what I learned that also this year, it was not unanimity, it was not accepted. I think it's a pity. We have to do something in this third basket. Helga, do you have any idea, and also it's a question to Swedish chairmanship in office, to Robert, why is it so? What we can do that next year we will have, at that time of the year, this traditional important meeting on human dimension implementation meeting. 2 years ago, there was Lech Wałęsa who took part in the opening. How do you see that issue?
Yes, I think the issue is that we are an organization based on consensus principle, like, by the way, the European Union. This is an enormous strength, and I will for sure would never contest the consensus principle because it's way more difficult in the OSCE to get to consensus. I mean, you mentioned it. I thought 27 was difficult, or 28 before. 57 is way more difficult. On the other hand, decisions that are based on consensus principle are a very strong one, and it also protects everyone. We have smaller and very small states, and we have bigger states. So I would not blame the consensus principle. The problem is that decision-making is being politicized. And you mentioned HDIM. I could also add ASRC, which was delayed this year because it took forever to agree on the agenda. So even agenda setting becomes politicized. The budget was raised, which is a real problem. It costs money. It's even a reputational issue for the OSCE. And this is, I think, something we have to work on because it's, and maybe, and this is when I compare, because you asked me before, because I come from the European Union, what's the difference? I think what we suffer from in the OSCE, that is sometimes we don't get enough attention, visibility in capitals. This is probably because maybe NATO, EU is more on the radar screen. And this is why when the budget is adopted, I have the feeling sometimes it's not even known in some capitals. So I think this is why I'm trying to promote also visibility of this organization, the great work this organization does. I mean, Sweden and Linde and colleagues have been very, very helpful in this, also trying to link up more with other agendas. But we need to do that even more because this politicization is not acceptable. It's lack of trust, you're right, but sometimes it's not even lack of trust. Sometimes it's even it's promoting national interests and making linkages that should not be there. But maybe as I have the micro, maybe just last word, and this is another issue as budget was raised. We also have a problem with resources. I mean, we have more and more taskings, also because of the new challenges out there, but we have less and less resources. We had cuts in real terms of 18% in the last year. it's anyway an organization that runs on a tiny, tiny budget. Robert knows it. And this is also something where, and it goes hand in hand with the visibility issue, because the more visibility you probably have about the good work that's being done, probably this will also help in that respect.
Thank you. I will give you also a possibility to refer to that question. But Minister Rao, we read recently that you had a meeting as a chairperson in office with Minister Lavrov on the margins of United Nations General Assembly. I think that it was very positively commented. It gives an opportunity also to talk on other issues. But Russia is a key player in that organization. What are your plans? How do you want to involve Russia and maybe to find a role for the organization in Belarus? Because these are the most important countries' issues as far as security is concerned. And I also see a chance just for Poland just to somehow establish working relations with these two countries. How do you see that issue?
As you have just rightly pointed out, I suppose that the favorable comments concerning my meeting with Mr. Lavrov was where his comments were justified. Indeed, the meeting took place in a very constructive atmosphere, I have to admit it. It was the first meeting, so we didn't have a chance to discuss details. All I can say that I was invited to Moscow, and my interlocutor promised that we will discuss the most difficult issues, accompanied by his experts. So, and I understood that he meant the most difficult conflicts. Well, certainly Ukraine. He expressed his views concerning the origin of the conflict in around Ukraine. I didn't have to agree with that, but the basis of our meeting was that we have our well-known and well-established views, so to speak, and I was saying this as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, but nevertheless, having known that we are looking for a room for consensus, and the conclusion we reached in this respect was that the consensus will be possible. So this is very encouraging. Whether Ukraine is going to be in the center of this consensus, it has to be. It's going to be very difficult to build it, but nevertheless, there is no alternative to it, right? Belarus, certainly, Southern Caucasus too. So, to mention the most difficult issues. But the question that arises right now is how to begin the process of building this consensus. I suppose there are some principles that should, correct me if I'm too optimistic or too inexperienced, so to say, unexperienced. So the issue, I suppose, is it's necessary to prevent any attempts of instrumentalization or politicization of the agenda, especially by the bigger, more powerful participating states. And so what is also necessary is to create the atmosphere in which even the big and very influential participating states are being successfully encouraged, I would say, to mitigate their particular interests and at agree what the common interest of the community is. And the other thing is it's very important, and my discussion with Mr. Wawrow indicated that this is really one of the starting points. We cannot assume that we can reach we can build a consensus if we want, even conceptually, to exclude someone's interest. If we believe so, we are bound to fail, because you can reach the consensus only by discussing the interests, points of view, and desires, the experiences, the identity of each and every participating state. And then we have to try to act together, and I suppose a lot of patience is absolutely necessary.
Thank you. And a question to Swedish chairmanship about human rights. Maybe because Sweden is famous for setting very high standard of human rights, maybe it's difficult to follow for every country in the organization. Maybe we should be more flexible to adapt and to have that conference on human rights. But Robert, what would be your advice to Poland with your experience in that position?
I don't think that Poland needs advice. I think the program, the priorities presented by Poland are absolutely the right and correct priorities, which will also ensure continuity in the work of the organization. The third human dimension is an essential aspect of the comprehensive concept of security of the OSCE. And it's extremely important that after 2 years hiatus, the HDIM meeting will take place during the Polish chairpersonship. The consensus principle, there is no alternative to that, quite obviously. It is a principle to defend the fundamental interests of member states, of participating states. It is not a principle which will and should allow participating states to impose their will on other participating states. We have seen problems in that respect, not only related to the major participating states, but also to some of the smaller states. And we need together to work hard to revert that tendency, which will otherwise weaken the organization and weaken the ability of the organization to implement its comprehensive concept of security.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and it will be no possibility to comment on that. We are in an important period concerning that organization. I hope that next year at the Warsaw Security Forum, Minister Zbigniew Rau can report to us about successes of Polish presidency. I hope that also Human Dimension meeting will take place in Warsaw next year. I would like to warmly thank to our panelists for their time and contribution to that discussion. Thank you very much.